And when you get in, you have to add the room that we're in, which is called Palfi. So if you get a picture of the QR code, you'll be able to pose questions using Slido. And we have ample time for a panel discussion later on, so please prepare your questions and we'll receive them up here on the screen and we can discuss them. We have a total of about 75 minutes, which we'll divide into 4 presentations and a panel discussion before I conclude at the very end. Today's presentations are made by, in order of appearance, Ben Butters, who's the CEO of Eurochambres, Fabrice Lassache, who is chair of the BusinessEurope Entrepreneurship and SME Committee, Veronique Willems, Secretary General of SME United, and Emmanuel Peters, who's currently in the audience but will come up and give his presentation when it's time. And for the panel discussion, we're also joined by Mariana Gitoy, who's team leader of Better Regulation in DG GROW in the European Commission. Each presenter has about 5 minutes to do their presentation before we move on to the next. We might spend a little more time on the presentations, but we'll see how it goes. And then after that, we open for the panel discussion, which will last roughly half an hour before we conclude at the very end. And please remember to pose questions via Slido. We do have a roaming mic in the audience when we get to the panel discussion, so feel free to ask questions that way too. The topic for today is better regulation and SMEs, but with a special emphasis on the SME test, which exists both at the European level as part of the impact assessments that the Commission has to carry out, and at the national level where member states are meant to carry out their own tests. While the presentations will probably focus on the SME test, I will try to broaden the panel discussion that follows to a slightly more general discussion about better regulation and regulatory burdens as they pertain to SMEs. So with that, let's get underway with the presentations. So I now give the floor to Ben Butters, CEO of Eurochambres. Ben, the floor is yours, and I think you have a clicker for your slides if you need it.
Push the green button.
Thank you very much, Paul. Pleasure to be here. Indeed, we're going to initially focus on the SME test, but I fully agree with you, Paul, that has to be seen in the broader perspective of the challenge of reducing regulatory burdens on businesses. And that means not just reporting burdens, which are maybe this much of the burden for businesses, but regulatory burdens more broadly, including all aspects of compliance, which is probably more like this. The SME test is a mechanism whereby new legislation should be SME-proofed to make sure that all of the elements that are relevant to small and medium-sized enterprises have been adequately considered and costed, and that the decision to proceed with a legislative proposal are based on that information. It's not supposed to define whether that decision is taken or not. That's a political decision in the EU, in the European Commission. That's a decision taken by the College of Commissioners. But we, I think, speaking on behalf of SME United and BusinessEurope as well as Eurochambres, we firmly believe that those decisions should be taken on the basis of a very robust understanding of the implications on small and medium-sized enterprises. And to do that, we need SME tests. The methodology for conducting SME tests has been developed within the European Commission as part of their internal impact assessment guidelines. They've been updated over the years and changed, but we, as the 3 business organizations, feel it is incumbent on us to work with the European Commission to gauge whether those guidelines, whether that methodology is being correctly implemented. This is not exciting work. It's pretty laborious, pretty uninspiring and procedural, but as I said, it's important. It's important to us as SME representatives, and we're very grateful that we work closely with DG GROW and the European Commission on the process, because it's important to them as well as the guardians of the legislative process and such key players in ensuring that we are providing a business-friendly environment, an SME-friendly environment. That is important in the broader context of competitiveness. I suppose the name Draghi has come up a few times today already, so I'm not going to quote it again, but I was interested to see another high-level representative this morning, Christine Lagarde, speaking about the challenges for the European economy, and she said that the welfare state provision and the increase in investment in defence and tackling climate change are in jeopardy unless the EU reverses the persistent decline in growth. This is something that we as Eurochambres certainly agree with, and it's central to our messages for the next EU term. And the SME test is a small practical element in pursuing that growth agenda, in making sure that what the EU does is fit for businesses, fit for competitiveness, and fit for growth. The new report that we've jointly prepared, the SME Test Benchmark 2024, has come out today. So we between us are going to explain what's in there, what the main findings are, and what our recommendations are. We've done this. We did this again previously a couple of years ago. We've slightly updated the procedure, again working with the European Commission on that. And we very much hope that the messages that we convey will be taken as a constructive input to make the SME test more effective, to help the European Commission, but also, as I think Emmanuel will talk about, also, perhaps these lessons can be learned at national level. And on a broader level, before I conclude, Paul, we often bash the European Commission, and I think they are the obvious targets because, as I said, they're the ones who prepare the legislation, they're the ones who draft it, they do the impact assessments, the regulatory scrutiny board checks the impact assessments, the College of Commissioners approves the proposal for legislation before it goes into the broader sausage machine of the EU institutions. But the other institutions have a very strong role to play in this as well. And this is something that Draghi mentioned as well, the need for dynamic impact assessment. And we believe that within that, we need dynamic SME tests as well. When the European Parliament, when the Member States in Council are looking at European Commission proposals, gauging them, discussing them, negotiating them, they also need to be conscious of the potential changes that they're considering and the implications that they could have on the SME community. So this is part of that process. We hope it proves to be useful, and I'm happy to hand over to my colleagues to talk you through more of the details of the report.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We can applaud you, no?
Yeah. We'll do that. Thank you.
Mainly the...
There we go.
Voilà.
Okay.
Voilà.
So mainly we can say that this collective work, including the European Commission, has provided some results, and we are quite positive on the trajectory. And we are positive because, first of all, the majority of consultations are being held in all languages. We are 27 countries in Europe. Maybe sometimes France forgot, but we are 27. Each country has an importance, and each country needs to be able to appropriate the regulation and to input the regulation. So this is very important for us that all languages are available for this feedback. We have also diversified the methodology to get the feedback from SMEs. And this is also important to make sure that the target is large and not always the same group or the same over-engaged type of people. We also are happy by the fact that our organization are around, because most of the time when regulators say we will do a reality check, they did that in Germany, they go directly to the company. But it's not a good way when we are not around, because me, I am in my company every day. If I was only in my company, I cannot know about CSRD, CS3D, deforestation, all this directive, late payment, all the details. I cannot know it. So if you come to me and ask me questions, I will not have all the information. So the feedback is also consolidated by organization like Eurochambres, SME United, BusinessEurope. And it's important that in this process, you have everybody on board, and I think that it was, we think that it was quite well taken, this point. The SME views were fairly represented in the piece that we had to analyze, but however, there are always possibilities to improve. Today we have a 12-week consultation period. It can be sometimes a bit tricky, it's short, but at the same time we ask the Commission to be fast, so we cannot complain. The problem is sometimes it overlaps with some days off, national holiday, and to be a bit more relaxed according to to be pragmatic, according to the piece of regulation. When it's very complex, what's the problem to give 14 weeks? When it's simple, maybe 10 weeks is needed. So it's always the same. To be psycho-rigid does not help. We need to fit the reality. And this is what we hope in the future. The quantification of impact on SMEs could be improved. And also, when we have summary of all the feedback, the dedicated chapters for the SMEs feedback is not always clear. So if it's spread out across a document, you don't have the same impact, the same effect, the same reading than if it's really condensed in a dedicated section. So all this could be improved. I have a bunch of numbers, but I think I finished my time. Don't worry.
Yep.
I stop here. But just to say that all these numbers, of course, are available in the study. And I think that we also have some executive summary. And there are really 20, 30 KPIs. So feel free to consult them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabrice. And the study will be available on your various websites as of today, so that people will be able to go in and download it from there. That's great, and we'll get back to the further issues about the SME test. So I hope that all your notes have not been for nothing. We will get back to them. But now, Veronique, if you will say a few words also from the SME United point of view here. It may
Can we get
forward.
the next?
There we go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Good. So following up on the findings that we made, we have also again formulated a few recommendations, also again highlighting that indeed improvements have been made in the past few years. We also know that the Commission is really going for it, specifically DG GROW is really working with the other DGs as well. First of all, on consultations and data collection, Fabrice already mentioned it. Consultations, we still notice that certain periods are not completely followed. You mentioned the holiday periods. That remains quite of an issue. I think also starting now the new mandate, we already feel a lot of consultations coming up at the same time. It will be important to also take into account the absorption capacity, as I always call it, of organizations, of companies, especially SMEs, to be able to digest 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 consultations at the same time. If you want to have a meaningful input, there needs to be some planning around, and there needs to be some time to also digest all of those. Data collection is also very important, making sure that there is a planning, that there is support to collect data is a very important part. Then specifically, clear differentiation between the size classes. The impact on an SME with 5 in staff is not the same as the impact on an SME with 250 in staff. They will both suffer, but the one a bit more than the other. So making sure that there is a differentiation in size classes that will also have an impact to a point that I will come to at the end. A third point is the assessment of indirect and cumulative impact with a quantification, and I think that has been the main challenge, the main problem with a lot of proposals in the past mandate, especially in the Green Deal proposals. For several legislations, SMEs have been taken out of the scope of the legislation, so they are exempted, for instance, for the CSRD, the sustainability reporting. But in the end, they do face that reporting because in the value chain, they're bigger, the larger companies have to report, and they will ask the smaller suppliers to also provide information. So that's the indirect impact, which is quite impactful at the moment. Secondly, there's also the cumulative impact. We've had several questions the past few years on what is the most burdensome legislation. And most of the time when we ask that question to small companies, they're like, but it's not one, it's the whole amount. I have to comply with this, that, and the total makes that on average I'm spending 16 hours a week, that's 2 full working days, on paperwork for public authorities. That's the important thing that we have to assess. And then the final recommendation is on clear, comprehensive and easy to apply mitigating measures. And then I go back to the differentiation between the size classes. There will be differences in mitigating measures for micro companies in compared to medium or larger companies or small companies. So it's making sure that the mitigating measures are also tailored towards the size of the company that makes sure that, that we can move in a positive way.
That was it. Thank you very much. So that concludes the presentations from the 3 organizations that have produced the report, which is available today, and where some of these conclusions are the main conclusions. We'll get back to the SME test during the panel discussion as it pertains to the work done by the Commission and the European institutions. But now we'd like to turn to the discussion about what happens with the SME test at member state level. And for that, we have Emmanuel Peters here. He's the Belgian SME envoy, and the Belgian SME envoy has been in charge of trying to collate data and give us some conclusions on how the test works on the member state level. So Emmanuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul. First of all, I must confess that I don't agree with what Ben Butter said. SME test is not boring. It's exciting to do SME test. And maybe it's the main conclusion of our report. We have to improve, to motivate the national lawmakers and the national stakeholders to do SME test. That's the reason why we may not say that SME tests are boring. So indeed, my intervention will focus on a specific aspect of better regulation, namely the national SME test. We recently conducted a detailed report on this subject, whose findings I will share with you, but in a nutshell, because in 5 minutes it's impossible to do it with all the details, so I will go straight to the point. As you maybe know, the purpose of the SME test is to evaluate the potential impact of legislative proposal on small and medium-sized enterprises. It then allows either to adapt the legislation or to adopt mitigation measures by carefully assessing the costs and benefits of various policy options. This tool supports the think small first principle and aims at creating a more favorable business environment for SMEs. Of course, the SME test represents just one part of the broader better regulation initiative. It is only one tool among many others. My goal with this presentation is to enrich today's discussion on better regulation by presenting the insight and results from our recent work. This report was conducted at the request of the SME Envoy Network and the European Commission. To gather insights on the national SME test, we carry out 2 surveys, one targeting member states and another focusing on national SME stakeholders. Through these surveys, we collected detailed information on how each country implements its own SME test. So, what are the main findings and the areas of improvement? One important finding is that there is an important potential for improving awareness amongst stakeholders about the existence and application of the national SME tests. Only half of the respondent stakeholders are aware of the existence of the SME test in their own countries, highlighting an evident lack of awareness of the practice. And it is really surprising, since the respondent stakeholders are associated with well-established supranational SME representative organizations. Another finding is linked to transparency. Improving transparency could enhance both the quality and effectiveness of SME tests. The SME test results are currently published in about 3/5 of member states, but even when they are published, they may still be difficult to access, leaving some room for improvement. Therefore, expanding the publication and accessibility of SME test results is worth considering. Continuing on the topic of transparency, both groups of respondents show interest in accessing SME test results from other countries and stakeholders even slightly more so than member states' representatives. This suggests that exchanging SME test results amongst countries could be a good practice to enhance transparency. On another topic, looking at how to define an SME when applying the SME test, it turns out that in practice, more than 3 out of 5 member states currently utilize the European SME definition. The European definition of SME also happens to be the preferred definition of all responding stakeholders. Therefore, we can conclude that the use of the European definition of SME across all countries could be further explored. Such harmonization could prove to be beneficial for the functioning and comparison of national SME tests. The results of the surveys show a push for an increase in the use of compulsory testing under specific conditions for new primary legislation and European legislation. The result of the survey showed that member states themselves suggested that improvements were needed within the stakeholders' consultation, such as getting in touch early with SMEs, increased involvement of stakeholders to detect and evaluate impacts should be encouraged in early stage of drafting regulatory proposal, and the need for more quantification of the effects on SMEs, which can be done through better stakeholders consultations. Another important topic is quality control. As a conclusion, ensuring that quality control is made by an independent body is beneficial for enhancing the overall quality of SME tests. Very few member states report that the SME test is mandatorily reviewed in case of a negative quality control assessment. And this is a concern, since the SME test should not be just a formality. It must be qualitative for it to be useful. Quality control and revision of the SME test in case of negative quality control assessment is part of this process. Next to having the quality control made by an independent body, another way to ensure the quality of the SME test is to revise it mandatorily in case of a negative quality control and to publish the results of the quality control. Both member states and stakeholders request an increased and improved quantitative impact assessment. You already said it. This can be achieved notably through enhanced stakeholders' involvement, constant adjusting of methodologies, or the development of a dedicated analysis procedure. New legislation can impact businesses directly, but it can also have indirect effects. There is definitively some room for improvement here. And the CSRD, as you said, is the best example of this. When negative impacts on SMEs are identified, a common approach is to implement mitigating measures to assist SMEs in adapting to the new regulations. The most common existing mitigating measures overall correspond to the measures considered most effective or useful by the larger number of member states and stakeholders. Reduced fines or fees based on enterprise size, reduced reporting obligations for SMEs, and longer transition period for SMEs. There is a pretty limited desire for harmonization as regards the national SME test. Half of stakeholders support some level of harmonization, for example. So, in conclusion, the SME test can be a driver for better regulation, but it can be significantly improved. But this is not the only way to improve better regulation, you will have the opportunity to discuss this further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. That was quite interesting. And again, that's also a report that is available, the report published on the use of the SME test at member state level. It's now time for us to move on to the panel discussion where we broaden out the topic a little bit, and I can promise we'll go broad before we go narrow again, and then we can broaden out again at the end. Please post your questions using Slido. Remember to put the room name PALFI on, and the questions will appear up here. But I think we should get it going with a broad question, which if you answer that, we will all just leave early. So, on the one hand, there seems to be consensus that SMEs are the backbone of European enterprise. On the other hand, we seem in Europe to be creating a situation where it comes to regulation that makes it more and more difficult to run a business. So going back to Milton Friedman, the famous economist, he said, the business of business is business. That brings the question, if you were to have a go at it, how can we make regulation in the EU more SME-proof? Ben?
Well, what we've just been discussing for the last half hour would, I guess, help if they did proper, if we systematically conducted rigorous cost-benefit analysis of all incoming legislation and adapted the proposal based on that cost-benefit analysis, then we are home and dry. There will never be a burdensome piece of regulation again. So we can all pack up and go home. But of course, that's not yet the case. We're some way from it. But it's an important point. I'm not sure how many commissioners are disciples of Milton Friedman, but there is some truth, of course, in what he says, and the objective must be to get the balance right. We can't regulate ourselves to zero emissions. We can't regulate ourselves to a competitive Europe. We have to provide a framework whereby businesses can invest in climate change, can invest in digitalization, can invest in international opportunities. And that means getting the balance right between their regulatory obligations, what they have to comply with, and the way they have to report on that compliance. And again, I stress the difference there. We can't just focus on the reporting, but we have to look at the broader compliance burden on businesses, especially SMEs. And if we can get that balance better, we will be making progress in the right direction.
Yeah, because you talk about it as a balance, because I was about to say, you do like regulation somehow, don't you?
Yeah, this is not a deregulatory agenda. Allow me to reiterate that. There is, of course, a place for regulation, and regulation is one of the main tools for the development of the single market, for example, which is a massive bonus to competitiveness and growth. It still doesn't work perfectly, and many SMEs don't capitalize on opportunities across the single market yet because they encounter administrative requirements and differences in the way that legislation is applied in different member states. But there is certainly a place for regulation, but it has to be designed in a manner that is simple, easy for businesses to comply with, and that contributes to our broader policy objectives rather than undermining them. Right.
How about you, Veronique? If you had one go at making regulation in the EU SME-proof, what would you want?
Think small first and act accordingly. We have the SME test. We've seen that in certain SME tests in the past few years, there was a clear indication that it would be quite burdensome for small companies. Nevertheless, the legislation passed without taking that into account. So that's also a very important thing. It's important to do a thorough SME test, and then it's also important to take the results of that SME test into account and indeed, for instance, propose mitigating measures. So that's the first thing. I think We have 25.8 million small companies in Europe. 44,000, and now I'm rounding above because it's 43,420 to be exactly, according to Commission data. 43,000 are large companies. That means that there is 25.x million small companies left. And if you look at the number of companies with less than 10 employees, that is 93.6%.
Right.
So around 25 million are small companies, but really micro with less than 10 employees. And then I go to the riddle that I've been telling the past 8 years. That's an entrepreneur with 1, 2, 3 employees, providing us all with quality products and services. And in the evening when staff goes home, because we have a work-life balance directive in Europe, that entrepreneur, or he or she, can dive into the rules, figuring out what they have to comply with, how they are going to implement it in their company, and making sure that it gets implemented. And sometimes when I'm reading initiatives from the Commission, I'm thinking, how the hell? And I think that's something.
So you're identifying the problem. What I want to get closer to, and I'll get back to you on that, is I want to try and find some solutions. Because what we really want to do is we want to send the Commission home. We want to write a one-page memo after this session where we tell them, this is really what we want you to do. So I'll get back to you because you gave us a number of the problems. Think about that. I'll come back to you.
No, but I can already reply right now.
Go ahead.
The moment you start making legislation and drafting legislation with that person in mind, you will start writing in a different way. And that's the whole that's the whole idea.
Right.
Making that mind shift, not making the legislation with a numerous amount of requirements, but starting with what is our objective? And what is really, really needed to get that objective. If you want equal pay for men and women, the objective is getting a same amount on a bank account, not producing a huge amount of reports.
Got it. Another economist, John Maynard Keynes, said that in the long run we're all dead, which was an answer to looking for a long-term equilibrium. The question could be, what you're striving for is an ideal, which is probably pretty far off because we have a current stock of legislation within the EU that has not been made with that thought in mind. So what do we do in the meantime? Think about that a little and we'll move on to Fabrice.
Look, first of all, better regulation is a topic that I heard about since 3 years. And I think it's not since 3 years, it's for more long time.
Exactly.
I have to say that better regulation seems very complex to achieve because if you hear the one in, one out, which is more a slogan, a bit marketing, it has not delivered. Now we speak about 27 out, 1 in. I don't know what new slogan. The president of the Commission said minus 25%. And now we are even not started with 1%, but we are doubling down with minus 35% for SME. For sure, we are happy when we hear that, but there are a kind of frustration when after this, there is no real thing because we come back in our country to our members and we said, you see, we managed to get this from the European Commission, and they say, great. And then 6 months or 1 year after, they say, but nothing. So I would say if you want a very concrete answer for this better regulation is less regulation. Okay. When I say less regulation, it does not mean no regulation, because obviously we need regulation, norms, standards for the single market. But if you take a step back and you look at how we envision the whole thing since few years in Europe, for example, for the decarbonation or for the digital, because another word that I heard a lot in Brussels was twin transition. No conversation without these twins. And if you take the decarbonation, you have laws, regulation that have non-stop been in all details for every sector. You need to use this technology. You need to use this technology at this pace. You need, if you don't do it, you will have penalties at this date, etc., etc. We see this with automotive, EVs, catastrophe today. We were against, we were explaining difference of technology. China use all technology for automotive. US use all technology for the energy sector, but we go in one technology. The other path, the other choice would have been, okay, what is the target behind this? We want to be net zero, for example. So we say in the regulation, we need to be net zero at these dates. Then companies do whatever you want, e-fuels, liquid, hydrogen, GPL, nuclear, wind,
Fabricio,
whatever you want. So less regulation.
Yeah.
One regulation that sets the framework, the vision, the goal. Everybody know the rules, how he can invest. No kind of effect that, for example, if you do research on hydrogen and the signal is only on EVs, maybe you will stop this to go and also take the subsidy, because there are also lots of public funding in all this that is linked to this regulation that is based on technology orientation. So this is less regulation for this. If you take the digital, you have this approach, artificial intelligence, we regulate, the data, the private. Of course, we share this. But at some point in time, they created the sandbox, to allow this innovative startup to do some trials. But the activation of the sandbox is so much limited, it's so much complex that I'm even not sure that a lot of companies are using these opportunities. But the principle should be the other way around. It should be a principle of sandbox, of experimentation. And then, if all this experimentation that is supervised, that is controlled, has a problem, then we do a regulation. But now we do the other way around.
Right.
So this is from the approach to that we can have less regulation if we focus on the goal and not in all details and all sectors.
Because it brings us back to the Slido, which is why I was trying to stop you, which is obviously impossible. The question,
difficult.
The question is, why do we do this very top-down approach? Should we not ask innovative entrepreneurs to collaborate with us to find solutions for the regulatory obligations and reporting? How were SMEs involved in setting this benchmark? So the question really is, and I think it comes back to exactly what you're saying, how do we actually involve the entrepreneurs, the innovative people out there? I'm asking you because you probably don't agree that some of us are technocrats and some of you are entrepreneurs, because you probably have a foot in each camp. You run your own company, you do your own thing, but you're also involved in this. Is it possible to get more of your innovative entrepreneur colleagues to get involved in finding the solutions?
It's very difficult because the entrepreneurs, as you were saying, are in the company. They need to do their jobs, and I think it's you or you said it very correctly. Today, the administrative burden is taking them their brain away. They are navigating the world with potentially the due diligence, the risk, the legal action, the fines, the penalty, going to jail. It's very pressuring for entrepreneurs that they do the bad things for the environmental law, and then they are going to courts, being sued. And so they don't have enough time to focus on their products, and also the resource that is eaten by all this. You speak about CSRD, but for a cement company, CSRD in France, it means like 10, 15 people hired to prepare for this time, and so on and so forth. So they cannot be in the process. That's why there are organizations with people that are not entrepreneurs, that are employees of this organization, that are doing a very good job, that are experts, that help entrepreneurs to understand what is at stake, that helps entrepreneurs to convey the message. And that's why I'm a bit, because there is this tendency to say we'll do this citizen consultation, we'll do this direct to the entrepreneur, but it's not always bad. But sometimes it's a little bit marketing, and we need to be very serious. We have organization that consolidates feedback. We need to work with them to save time, because they have the expertise and they have already spoke to everybody, MEDEF speak to all sectors. We have 100 sectors in France in our organization. So why to go to all these sectors or to all these companies behind? You can do, but it cannot be like the tag word or the magical solution.
And we heard from Emmanuel that half the companies don't even know in the member states that the SME test exists, so that's part of the problem. I just want to get Mariana in before we take questions from the audience. We have a microphone somewhere so that we can have that. Perfect. We'll have the first question over here. But Mariana, if you were to try and say what it would take to try and make the regulation in the EU more SME-proof, what would you focus on?
Thank you, Paul, for your question, and I would like to say that I like it very much, because you are not asking what the Commission can do to make regulation more SME-friendly, but what can we do?
Yeah.
Because better regulation is a collaborative process. It involves many actors, EU institutions, of course, the Commission, the Parliament, the Council, but also the Member States and European SME organization, national stakeholder organization. So we all need to step up our efforts for SMEs. The Commission, of course, is ready to play its role and to do its fair share of the process, but it is extremely important to have similar efforts by all actors involved in this better regulation. Right. If you allow me a comparison with tennis, sorry, my son plays tennis, so it's something, you cannot only train your forehand or only your backhand. To have a performance game, you need to train all parts of your game, and we need to do the same here. So I think that going back to 3 years ago, that you mentioned, it is exactly 3 years ago when the Commission committed to renewed its commitment to systematically apply the SME test in a proportionate way. And the Commission also launched the SME filter. This is a tool allowing the SME invoice network to detect very early in the process initiatives that are relevant for SMEs. And the 3 organizations here are part of this process. And I think that this is an innovative approach allowing organizations to contribute very early in the process. And I think that our collective efforts in the Commission would benefit from this input from the organization that you can provide. But it is not only about the SME test or the SME filter. The Commission adopted an SME relief package which puts forward a number of measures, notably SME-friendly provisions, which are in fact mitigating measures that we want to systematically apply in draft legal acts, because defending SMEs is not only for the impact assessment for the SME test, but the way we draft the acts, because very often the details of an act are not assessed in the impact assessment. Things like timing of an initiative, when it will enter into force, phasing in for SMEs. These are details which are introduced in acts at the stage of the legal drafting. So we need to make sure that we systematically include provisions that are lighter for SMEs. And deforestation was given as an example. Yes, the reality on the ground shows that we need more time in order to allow stakeholders to prepare for the implementation. This is something that we regularly do in the Commission, so we apply these SME-friendly provisions to draft legal acts. But the problem, I would say, is that SME needs are considered at the very early stages of the process. Call for evidence, SME test, legal draft by the Commission. What happens when the proposals go to the co-legislator? I would like to launch you a challenge. In your SME Test Benchmark report, you have given a very high grade, for example, to the Waste Framework Directive. I would be happy in 2 years' time or whenever you'll publish the next edition of your report to have a look and compare the Commission proposal, which has a very high score, and whatever will come out at the end of the legislative process. What about SME-friendly provisions? Are they still there? Are there better amendments proposed by the two co-legislators? So it would be very interesting to see a bit what is the commitment of all actors in this process.
Yes.
And because you ask...
Thank you very much. That's a very good point. I think we'll get back to that we're talking about the whole legislative cycle here. Exactly. We are talking about what happens as it goes from Commission to Parliament, from Parliament to Council, from Council to Member State, and then Member State is implementing. And even before it does that, we might have the main piece of legislation that has been impact assessed and SME tested, but the implementing measures, maybe that's where things happen and they haven't really been tested at all. We'll get back to that also. I hope we'll have time to get back to the whole idea of slowing down the process. But we have some questions and we'll take the first one here. Please introduce yourself so that people know who we're talking to.
My name is Andreas Lutz. I'm coming from Germany. We are, I'm heading an alliance of 35 associations representing more than 100,000 self-employed. I read years ago, I think when I was introduced about the SME test and thought, great idea. Hopefully, they will involve also self-employed people without employees and maybe even part-time self-employed. That would be the hardest test because this group has the same duties, but much less time to learn about it, learn about their duties and fulfill them. In all those years, I think that was 10 years ago, I never got in touch with the SME test. No, I don't know of any of our 100,000 members who was part of it. And I think it would be very valuable to have, as in product development, law is a product in itself, to have like a focus group, a discussion with the users. And I'm very much with Mrs. Williams, I think, that you have to think of the idea, and then how could we, get our goal with the least effort of everybody involved. So my question is, how can we get involved in this test and bring it to life?
Thank you. I think we'll let you all answer the question. We'll take one or two questions from the floor first, but it's one of them is, do you care about the self-employed? Do you care about the people with no employees? And if you do, how come they never hear from you? And the other issue would, of course, be maybe there's also something going on at the member state level here, but we'll get back to that. I think we'll take one or two questions if you can remember them or take notes. So that one was on the self-employed. We had a further two hands up in the audience. Okay, because I simply didn't quite understand the first question. You had so can I give the mic here? That's why I didn't take it, because I had a difficulty with one of your words. It's disappeared from my screen right now. It was.
No, I had a question about involvement of entrepreneurs, and I just had more of a comment to the answer. I get that it's difficult, but shouldn't we make it a business opportunity for them to get involved? So at least at national level, I have quite some inspiration for tools you could use to get the involvement of SMEs to solve the problem, especially with regulations that are, of course, already out there and cannot be designed with the entrepreneur in mind.
Right. Just a small remark from myself, because in Denmark, we've just had a working party within my organization, the Danish Business Regulation Forum, on regulatory experimentation. And one of the things we've suggested to Parliament is that they should try not always to propose answers to problems where they don't know the answers, but the parliamentarians could actually propose what we call a challenge bill. Challenge entrepreneurs to help them solve an issue that they obviously haven't been able to solve for the past 20 years themselves. So we have some inspiration from Denmark, certainly, if you would like to get in touch with us. But let's get back to the self-employed.
Firstly, if I may, on that point, we have been talking about this whole process from when the Commission launches its SME test to when the directive is transposed into national law via the co-decision-making process, the other institutions. But I don't think that is the whole process. And I think building on that point, we need the business community, the entrepreneurs, to be involved earlier, because this process only kicks off when the horse has already bolted, in the sense that the Commission has decided it wants to draft a piece of legislation. It has decided that legislation is the solution to the problem. And I feel that there are many occasions when there may be alternative solutions to the problem that are non-legislative. Part of the reason for that is that the EU institutions have always been about drafting legislation. It's their bread and butter. It's the raison d'être. Careers are defined by being the person who wrote GDPR or corporate due diligence. Or that has to change. The career should be defined on finding a solution to a problem that has been identified that needs to be addressed, finding a solution that works not
by
just...
whichever means.
Voila. Yeah. And that is not burdensome to business.
We move down the line here just to get some more responses here. On the self-employed, if we take that one.
SME United is representing the self-employed, so we represent our membership, where we also have several associations who have self-employed among their midst. I see Jesper nodding for Denmark, but I know that several others as well, and that's also why I emphasized so much the 93.6%, because that of course also includes companies without personnel. And indeed, it's important. I think I'm going to already reply partly for you as well, because the Commission also organizes SME panels, but maybe you want to elaborate on that so that I don't take your explanation.
But you can tap your name tags in a minute.
Voila, indeed. What I want to add also on what Ben said, I think partly entrepreneurs can be involved in finding the solutions. On the other hand, what we've seen in several pieces of legislations in the past few years, I'm thinking about GDPR, I'm thinking about CSRD, these have been real business cases for consultants. And I do not intend to continue making business cases for consultants on the back of my other entrepreneurs. So in that perspective, I'm a bit careful. I think we need the input from entrepreneurs, and as Fabrice also mentioned, we are really working hard to get that input and to make sure that we bring daily reality to the Brussels table. Going on what Ben also mentioned on objective and methodology, it's setting the objective and giving the entrepreneurs the trust that they will reach that objective. And if I speak with entrepreneurs in Europe at the moment, they don't enjoy doing business anymore because they don't feel trusted by the authorities. So that's a big issue, where I think we need to find the right balance again. And secondly, as I mentioned, and I can give another example next to the pay transparency, I always give the example of occupational safety and health. A construction company has to perform risks analysis, has to write reports on how they can ensure construction sites are safe. I prefer, along with a lot of entrepreneurs, the fact that they are making sure that on the construction site, everybody wears their safety boots, their helmet, their glasses, the whatever, and that on the construction site, everybody makes sure that everybody is kept safe, no accidents are happening, rather than the company having an elaborate risk analysis with a lot of handbooks in a closet that no one ever looks at.
Right.
And I think that's what I tried to explain before. The mindset shift of
it's a mindset,
very prescriptive, detailed, make sure that people know why they are doing this. If you look at American companies, I was speaking to a colleague a while ago, working in an American company. They have to hold the side when they are going down the stairs because you have a falling risk. They have rules when you're walking around with a hot cup of coffee to make sure you don't bump into another colleague. And they do that without even they raise that as rules, and they can get sanctioned if they bump into someone with a hot cup of coffee. But they realize why they are doing this. I think that at the moment in Europe, we have a lot of rules, a lot of legislation, where entrepreneurs are just doing things without knowing what the final objective still is, apart from producing paper.
We need to get Fabrice in here.
She said all. There is nothing to add.
Perfect. Well, I think we've got Mr. Peter. Sorry, go ahead.
Just to quickly react to your question, indeed, I would like to tell you that within the Commission we are reflecting on how to collect better input, and one of the issue we are currently exploring is to include the self-employed in the template for the open public consultation in order to have exactly, the input from this category. So it's very important to flag this to you. But also, the incoming Commission has announced a very ambitious agenda in terms of better regulation, including the so-called implementation dialogues and reality checks. So it will be important to make sure that these tools will have a strong SME dimension, including self-employed. So it will be important to make sure that these categories are well represented in these methodologies and processes.
Thanks a lot. We have a question on Slido for you, Mr. Peters, which says, has any law been rejected if the SME test indicated a negative impact on SMEs? So you talked about mitigating measures and so on, but if you can answer from the podium, has any law ever been rejected to your knowledge, or what happens? No. So we haven't had any laws rejected. What we have is the mitigating measures practice.
Not to my knowledge.
No. So we've never seen it being such a concrete no. Okay.
No.
Okay, that's great. Thanks a lot.
No,
Not great.
It can.
No, it's not great, but it shows that, no, thank you. Thanks, Ben. No, my point is, we haven't seen the ultimate sanction. We haven't seen a sanction where you say, yes, this has a negative impact for SMEs, so we're going to scrap it altogether.
But it can happen that in the social dialogue,
Yeah.
it can happen that the lawmakers stop.
Yeah.
That can happen, but never after reading a negative SME test, I think.
No. So that's simply too late, really. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
That's our point.
Yeah.
It is necessary to do it in an early stage. Otherwise, it's too late. And a lawmaker will never say, I was wrong, and stop his project. It never happens.
The great question here on the Slido, which is about something we've been discussing over the last week. Now we've had Elon Musk appointed head of new Department of Government Efficiency in the US. How do you think that's going to impact on what we do in Europe? I might just give you two little quotes. One is from our Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs, who says that in America they roll out the red carpet, in Europe they roll out the red tape. So how do you feel about Musk being appointed? Do you think it's going to make a difference to us, or do you think it's just a gimmick?
I don't think it's going to make a difference to the EU. It's the thing that frustrates me about that is the speed with which it's been achieved. We'll see what results it delivers, but very little has been. Well, of course, Commission officials, people in the European Parliament are working as hard as ever, but for the last year nearly, we've been in a power vacuum when it comes to EU policy making. Since a couple of months before the European Parliament elections, now we're waiting on the outcome of the Commissioner hearings, which is being absurdly abused by different political groups for their various objectives. And this is all to the detriment of the EU competitiveness agenda, the EU project as a whole. We can't afford every 5 years to spend nearly a year reforming our institutions. And Trump isn't even in office yet, and they've announced that they're going to be taking these very robust initiatives to tackle government efficiency and reduce regulatory burdens. As I say, I'm not saying it's the best practice, but it's impressive that they can act so quickly, and
they have slightly less complexity.
Well, yeah, but that we're not the fact that it's so
institutional complexity. That's what I mean.
Yeah, but that implies that the institutional structures that we have are no longer fit for purpose. Huh?
Which was the segue we have over to the final part of this session. And again, please, if you have questions, put up your hand, because now we actually have an incoming commission. We now have a window of opportunity. Right now is the time for us to be able to try to formulate to the incoming commission what we specifically want them to do. We've seen mission letters being issued by the Commission President to all the commissioners also on this topic. But right now is the chance. So, if you were to say one thing to the incoming commission that would make a real difference, and we are taking notes and we'll send it to them, what would you say, Fabrice?
I'm speechless.
Well, you could say do more, you could also say do less, work slower.
No.
Less regulation, that's what you said before.
We need to, there is no magical word. The reality is that the political shift, it's a question of political orientation. Before, if you look at the majority in the parliament, it was with more space for the green. If you, again, take a step back, what happened in the European Parliament, and I say it with my words very fast, and maybe a bit simplistic, but it goes a bit from the left and green to the right. And the fact that the EPP is more in charge and has maybe a pro-business vision more strong in its roots.
But take away all that complexity.
It's not complex. Deforestation was made by EPP. I'm not like everybody can have its own political opinion, but it has effect. The speech of Von der Leyen in July is the result of a political situation.
Right.
This political situation is the reaction of voters of something that they feel goes wrong. And if the reformists are not radical in the solution, you spoke about Musk, if the reformist governing parties are not radical in their solution, the populists always come. You have seen we have 16 or 14 countries, I think, that have changed government in the European Union. So at the Council, the bargaining is different. At the Parliament is different. The driving force are different. And so you need to use this force that is saying now we need to change the orientation of this big boat of Europe, because I don't believe at the revolution in one night. Half a degree of this big boat will take us in the right direction very far in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. And we really need to focus on the text, CSRD, CS3D, deforestation, other ones, because otherwise we only speak about generalities. What they do for this text in January, who, when, where, that's it. And we, as I think organization, fight for this, for tangible result, because we will not have an Elon Musk, because we are not US or China, we are not one country, we even cannot have this capacity. We are 27, and this complexity is also a strength if we turn it the good way.
Thank you. I'm going to try and rephrase the question for the rest of you here. I'm going to say, we are right now in November 2025. Let's try and disregard all the legislation that's been passed in the past, and talk to the Commission only looking forward, saying, if you were to ask them to do 1 or 2 things more consistently, more thoroughly, what would that be? And one answer could be, as we talked about earlier, less regulation. We've had other commissions that had big programs, we had some with small programs, but it could also be other more tangible things like applying the SME test more consistently or something else. What would it be? Do you want to go first, Ben?
My wish for the new EU term is that they be more output-driven than process-driven. We will all be waiting for the first Commission work programme next year, and that Commission work programme will almost inevitably include a series of new legislative proposals, whereby we know that a decision has already been taken that the process is a new directive or a new regulation, whereas the work programme should say we aim to achieve A, B and C, rather than we aim to have a new directive on. And let's look at alternatives to legislation.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. Veronique?
Yeah, I would like to first reply to the other question, because I didn't get the floor yet. Appointment of Musk in the US. For SMEs, I don't see a lot of impact, because they will not relocate their activities to US. But I do fear that there might become an even bigger pressure on bigger companies to consider leaving the EU and going to the US, because they are depicting it, and I'm stressing depicting it as the land of cream and honey. On the complex system, we have made Europe what it is. We are all voting. We have all created several political parties. In the US, it's red or blue. And the moment blue gets to power, blue goes full in and takes part of what red has done out, and the other way around. So that's not what we have in Europe. In Europe, you have nuance, you have balance, you have different powers. So I think that's very important to take into account. What we may hope a bit is that the pressure from Musk getting into that agency of efficient government is that we get some inspiration in Europe on how they do it. The Small Business Act of 2008 was also something that was imported from the US. So, on your question, I'm going to be very simple and repeat again. Think small first and act accordingly. Make it the way that small companies can comply with it if it's necessary. I follow Ben on that one. Don't make it more complicated than is necessary for the smallest ones. And if you see that for larger companies who have a broader impact, you need more layers, add them afterwards. Don't build the mountain and then try to take the top off. But put a ladder. Also for the small companies to grow, you need the ladder.
So Mariana, to you, the question is flipped. What would you like to see from the European business associations and from entrepreneurs in general in order to make it easier for you to achieve the goals set by the Commission?
Linking this question with the previous one on masks in the United States, I would say that what we need in Europe is a new normal business environment. And to achieve it, we all need to reflect on the way we work. We as European Commission, we as European institutions, but also in terms of SME representative organizations. There are a number of tools in place which give SME representative organization a voice early in the process, being via the SME Voice Network, the SME Filter, open public consultation, SBI follow-up meetings, SME panels. I would just name just a few. I think that it is important to work together, strengthen even further the SME test, and building on the recommendations of the Fit for Future platform opinion on the SME test, and also taking into account the conclusions of SME Test Benchmark report. I think that the SME check, the new SME check announced for the incoming Commission will be an opportunity to renew the way we work together. It will be an opportunity to further strengthen the SME test, but also looking beyond, it will be an opportunity to embed SMEs at every stage of the process. And referring to Commissioner Designate Séjourné, in his written replies to the European Parliament, he already included a number of elements. For example, he stressed the importance of implementing, including the SME dimension and the Think Small First principle at each stage of the policy making in the Commission, but also at the interinstitutional level. And this is why in the political guidelines, President Von der Leyen proposed to renew the interinstitutional agreement between the institutions to make sure that amendments proposed in the co-legislative process are assessed for their impacts on SMEs. So these are very important developments, and I hope that next year, in 1 year, and in 2 years, when you'll publish the SME Test Benchmark report, we'll have even better conclusions on progress toward achieving our targets. I think that better regulation is a journey, and let's see how far we can go together.
Right. Now, it's not going to be easy to sum up this discussion, really, but I'll try and just give a few pointers that I think were important from this discussion that started with the SME test and then followed on the more general discussion. One of the things that's been stressed from up here, and Ben did it at the end here as well, is could we please all be a little bit more output-oriented? Could we start by thinking about what the political objective that we want to achieve is, and once we agree on the political objective, can we have a very free and frank discussion about what it will take to try and reach that goal, where legislation might be one option, but there could certainly be others. We have from the Slidos as well a number of remarks that reflect on the fact that maybe, and this is probably quite controversial in a conservative sense, maybe politicians are not the best people at solving problems. Certainly the problems that we are currently facing. Maybe politicians should, to a larger extent, help identify the problems and then ask for help from entrepreneurs and from others on how to actually find the solutions. And that was also one of the questions from the audience here. How do we get involved in trying to help shape the solutions? And I think there is a disconnect, and I agree with you, Fabrice. You said, yeah, well, they have to run their business. And I find the big problem here is that it's not that they have to run their business, it's also that the way we talk, the way we work when we go into the regulation space is just so complex and boring, and it kills all initiative if you're an entrepreneur. So how do we set up the hackathons and all the other things that actually make it invigorating to be part of the process because you believe that you're actually helping find a solution? Again, alternatives to regulation. We also talked about the whole the whole regulatory cycle. It's not enough for us to discuss whether or not the Commission adheres to its consultation periods, though we all agree that it is really, really a nuisance when they all happen across holiday periods. So at the same time, it happens to the Commission, it happens in the member states as well. But look at it for the whole legislative cycle. We don't solve things only by solving the way the Commission does things. We have to look at what happens in Parliament. We have to look at what happens at Council. And frankly, we really have to look at what happens once we implement out in the member states. Because, I mean, that a regulation takes direct effect in each member state sounds very good on paper and probably at the Faculty of Law, but that's not how it works in practice. So many regulations now include options. And as soon as you've included options in a regulation, you've given room for national member state implementation to be different from country to country. And when you do that, you add complexity and you reduce the effect that the single market could have on all of us. So we have so many points of contact where we have to focus. And I really think that one of the things that could be very, very beneficial for many of us is to all try together to help the politicians, the Commission and so on, to refrain from thinking that whenever they're presented with a problem, a new piece of legislation is the solution. Take a deep breath, think it over, give it a little time, and I see people laughing in the audience. That's because they're civil servants at member state level. They have exactly the same problem there. But let's all try to work on seeing if we can just pull a little bit of that desire to find solutions within 5 minutes out of it, because we could do better solutions, we could involve more entrepreneurs if we spend just a little more time trying to find the right solution. That concludes this session, but remember that we still have the expert sessions upstairs. There's one on the single digital gateway starting up just as we finish here. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much to the panel. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the SME week. Thank you.